this potentially is one of the many scalable solutions out there that can really reverse the climate damage. It doesn't really just make business sense, but it's also for us to introduce nature as a new asset class. We don't want to create another artificial structures to replace coral reefs. We just want to give them a kickstart. Time is now, like the urgency is here.
Welcome to How to Help a Few Billion People, where we profile entrepreneurs that have aspirations to make life better for billions of people, and they're not out here to pursue making billions of dollars in profit. Purpose over profit, impact over investors. These are the entrepreneurs that we feature, and today I am so excited to introduce you to Vriko. Vriko is the co-founder of Archireef. She's an incredible story of spending time in the ocean, seeing coral reef degrading, and deciding to do something about it. And actually, after pursuing her PhD on this topic, after spending time in the oceans, realizing that theory was not enough to save our oceans, somebody had to put these things into practice. And so she did. She took a giant leap, not only in starting a venture, but eventually moving the venture a quarter of the way around the world to a new country in order to help scale Archireef. Archireef are panels that, as you'll learn about in the podcast, sit on small legs and have a biomimicry of what actual reef material is like. They are put down onto the ocean floors, and then from there, reef is able to grow on it. Its success rate in terms of rehabilitating reefs is over 90%. And this is not just in months, but in the years that they continue to monitor. They have a brilliant business model, not only for implementations, but ongoing data analysis and helping corporations realize how to manage their nature-based footprints and reply and respond to regulations that impact what they are doing to protect nature and biodiversity. It's a far-reaching episode. We get into some personal stuff in terms of how do we show up as founders. We talk about how do we move through really difficult things as founders when we have a mission-driven team, but maybe people aren't able to continue growing with the organization. We have to have hard conversations about them leaving the organization. We talk about early stages of financing. How do you get first capital in? How do you get that to get to revenue? Then how do you get bigger chunks of capital in order to expand your operations? And then we also spend some time talking about what just makes us more effective managers and what makes us more effective leaders. Vriko is inspiring. She is energizing. She's a little self-deprecating. And in all of these, there is some absolute golden nuggets in terms of what it takes to build a venture when you're especially proven into unknown and uncertain business models, as well as environmental rehabilitation solutions. So without further ado, let's jump in and hear from Vriko. Vriko, welcome to the Helping Billions podcast. I'm so glad to have you here today.
The pleasure is mine. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Vriko, I remember your story because I was lucky enough to see you present at Davos about 3 years ago. And one of the things that I remember you saying, and I'd love for you to just kind of recount this, is that you had this love for water, you were spending time in the water, and you saw this patch of coral degrading over time. And from that moment, you got out of the water and you decided to do something. Will you tell us a little bit more about, like, make that your story? Like, tell us more about what was happening, why you were in the water, what you saw, and then what you've come out to start.
Sure. So I was born and raised in the 90s in Hong Kong, which is probably one of the most urbanized coastline on earth. But I was very lucky that I was born on the countryside and my dad is a nature lover. So what a lot of people don't know is that we actually have 40% of our land preserved as country park. So on one hand, I've seen the skyscrapers, but on the other side, I've also seen the beauty of nature, which is really something that's quite unique about growing up in Hong Kong. And I think not until in 2014 that I've seen a small patch of coral community. I was diving weekly, and I've seen that particular patch of coral community disappear in just 2 months. That is the moment when I realized what is really happening in the water is no longer what I read about the books, that climate change is only increasing 1.5 degrees in like 20 years, 30 years. it really is happening at a much faster pace that I've ever imagined. And since then, I've been only focusing on coral restoration and if there's anything that we can do.
And so, like, bring me more into your brain here because lots of people dive in the water, lots of people spend time in forests and start to see these changes. But you actually like got out of the water and said, "I'm going to start a business." And I know it wasn't quite that simple, but bring me more into that evolution. How did you end up starting Archireef?
So I think it was that moment I realized that corals are disappearing much faster than I've ever imagined. I started researching coral restoration. My PhD is all about coral restoration from different angles. I was looking into the physiology, the like increasing the resilience, looking into the genetics to study the connectivity and the genetic resilience of that. But what I find the most interesting is probably the project that we collaborate with the other researchers from the School of Architecture and the School of Marine Science to co-invent this world first 3D printed reef tiles. The idea is simple. It's essentially turning underwater desert with the infrastructures that corals can stabilize themselves and recover from a degraded environment. So that's the moment that I realized technology really can make a difference. And this potentially is one of the many scalable solutions out there that can really reverse the climate damage. The only thing is, as a scientist, that's also where we stop. Our mission as a scientist is basically finding the problem, find a solution, publish, and then we move on. I was already 8 years in that journey back then. A lot of failures, a lot of painful time spent in the lab. But I also realized that that was not the reason why I started studying coral as my thesis. So that's also the moment that I realized there's a gap between scaling technologies and solutions with the broader scope of people. It's no longer just about the policymakers. It's not just about some scientists nor the conservationists. I think when we really want to make a change to reverse the damage, it really needs to get all hands in deck. And I think that kind of opportunity and the pathway to really get everybody together was kind of missing. So I co-founded Archireef, hopefully as a vehicle to accelerate the technology, but also getting everybody together to make restoration scalable.
And what you've developed here, right? And it's funny because this was years ago, but it really kind of stuck in my brain because there's something also in like just the simplicity of it. There's a 3D printed panel, this wide by this wide. Is that
Yeah,
ish? Yeah.
yeah.
And it almost looks like coral. Like to me, actually, it felt like a brain was sliced open. Like that's kind of the curvature of it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the wrong analogy. And so you developed these panels at the time. Were you still like in the lab? Like you had developed those in university setting, and then you kind of got to this place where you were saying, now I want to see adoption, but there's a gap. Or did you actually develop those panels, sort of say outside of the lab after already starting the venture?
So the reef tile was built in the lab with the idea just that, because I think a little backstory back then is that we were failing for consecutively 4 years. At the very first, when we were commissioned and working with the government to start this coral restoration projects, we were using the most traditional methods like the concrete blocks and the metal rebars. But what is really painful to see is actually a year after, like in year 2, you see that the survival rate dropped down to 20%. And like years of work just gone to essentially nothing. And that's essentially the moment that we realized that we need something different. Because when you see the failure, then you will also understand what corals really need to have that stability. So that's essentially the incentive behind us is that we don't want to get our time and effort wasted if we're spending that much time in the water anyways. So the idea, again, very, very simple, is really just thinking like trees. Trees, they have their root system anchored in the soil before they grow upwards. Unfortunately, coral doesn't grow like that. They only grow upwards without that substrate. So for us, what we really want to do is essentially using these 3D printed reef tiles essentially function as the root for corals, where they were essentially embedded on the sand to create this little bit of elevation from the sand for corals, but also giving them that the stability for them to continue to grow.
Okay, so it's that uh, uh, kind of structure that looks like coral on top, but there's a couple posts like kind of underneath, so it sits just elevated above the seafloor, and then the coral can
Yeah.
really take root and grow. And then the survivorship on it, I remember reading on the website, is like crazy high. Um,
Yes, that's definitely something that we're very, very proud of.
yeah.
95% survivorship after 3 years, and up now, like our oldest site is 5 years old and is still retaining at 90%.
Wow, that must be so incredible to see, especially having seen all the failures. So, okay, so you have these, you're seeing some progress in the lab. And this is what's so curious to me is like at this point, a lot of people would say, okay, now let me hand this project over, or maybe there's a nonprofit model here. You went for profit, right? You said, I think business is going to be actually the most powerful tool to get this implemented. Was was that like a hard decision to make? Did it come very naturally to you? Like, bring me a little bit more into how you decided to commercialize this in a a social enterprise, like purpose-driven profit path.
Yeah, so I think the back then when I first started, I think it was quite a naive way because I was just looking at the other roles I was playing. I was the advisor for the government and NGOs, and they're doing great work, and they're filling a critical puzzle within the civil society that we need for a holistic conservation strategy. But there is a gap between scaling solutions with the broader inclusivity. And for this one, I really have to thank our first commercial partner, which is the Sino Group. They actually reach out to us and say that they really want to be part of that solutions. And that also kind of coincide with the time that like the ESG movement that really corporates started looking into their environmental footprint other than just the carbon footprint that they have. So I think that's probably like the kind of beginning of the movement that the corporates are also looking into how can they bring net positivity to the society on top of what they're doing as a business. So that's essentially how it started. Like, or just that very naturally people are coming to us saying that they want to be part of the solutions.
Amazing. So you saw some inbound interest. You said there's a there, and you went for it. So you incorporated. You start to build the team. In those very early days, did you raise money right away? Did you just go straight, like based on revenues? Like, talk me through a little bit of that financing, because the even though it's a simple solution. I mean, I've seen videos and photos of it. Like, you've got a cool 3D
Yeah.
printer, right? That's like building these out. You've got raw materials. Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about how you financed the very early days.
Yeah, so at a very, very early stage, before we have the first client, we were heavily reliant on the government funding. We were very lucky that we have a lot of early stage companies support, like funding supported by the government in Hong Kong. Like ecosystem players like Science Park actually gave us enough funding to survive the first few years when we were still trying to figure out the business model. So that was really critical, but that was not enough to scale the company. So the kind of scaling phase, it was enough to survive, but on the scaling, it's really trickled down into two critical moments for us is the signing, the first commercial signing that gave us enough like capital to continue the journey, but also going essentially as a validation to our business model that we can go on to the next client and continue bootstrapping that way. The other critical moment is also our first investors, ADQ, one of the largest sovereign wealth fund in Abu Dhabi, reach out to us and say that it was really essentially they actually see the potential in us scaling outside of Hong Kong before we do. They see the potential of this technology. That's something that is needed in the local environment, specifically in the Arabian Gulf. And that's also the reason why we started exploring the market in the MENA region and the GCC region. And that's also where essentially we decided to come here and set this as our launch pad outside of Hong Kong.
Okay, and then for our listeners here, so MENA region, I know, Middle East, and North Africa. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So MENA region and then GCC. Which ones are those?
So we're focusing in primarily in the UAE as the first launch pad, and we're also operating in Saudi Arabia at the moment.
Okay, cool. So you like do you know how this came to be? Like you had you been pursuing PR? Like how did the word, so to say, really get out beyond the more local context where you're operating?
That's actually probably one of the luckiest moments for us is that even until today, we have very limited marketing budget. We were very lucky that we got a lot of attention from the local medias. Mark, that's also where we met, the World Economic Forum. We were
Yeah.
part of the uplink, and it really gives us the validity and the endorsement that big institutions see us and knowing that, well, this is a solution that they can trust. So it was the likes of CNN, World Economic Forum, Bloomberg, Forbes,
Yeah.
that gave us the attention and validation that for us to get to where we are today.
Yeah, it's so interesting. One of our other guests, Manoj Chowdhury from Drinkwell, was telling a story as they got featured on BBC, and then after they did that, a government official contacted them,
Yeah,
and that kind of led to their business model. And I think it's, um, there's this old quote in the U.S. It's like now it's very outdated, right? But it's like you don't get fired for hiring IBM. Was like the old quote, right? It's like, and I think it speaks to prestige. Like a lot of people, especially if they're investing in a new solution, they want to go to a place where they have trust. And I think for early stage startups working on really new novel things, especially for those of us working in like business to business sales, like you need the trust piece. You need the thing to say like, hey, I took a risk of working with the startup, but like this is why it was not risky. And I think PR is a really powerful tool in order to do that. Is that
absolutely.
it was, yep. It is. So did you go out and actively seek that PR? Was it all inbound? Like, do you remember how that first PR came to be?
It was all inbound. I think
Amazing.
it might be funny to say this, but I think we were founded in 2020. It was essentially the COVID year. It was the COVID time that I think positive news is also being encouraged. So in a way, it was difficult to start a business to get anything started during that time. But at the same time, we kind of benefit from the fact that the world want to listen to these positive stories, like good stories about the environment. So I think it was a good reminder that in a way, COVID also happened because we kind of disrupt the relationship between us and wildlife. So yeah, that's also kind of a paradox that we experience, but it did benefit to us.
Yeah, it helped. I remember watching one of your pitch videos, as I was like doing more background, right? And you were like pitching like with the COVID mask on, like you
Yes.
you were fully in it. Wow. And so okay, so you start to get some inbound interest, you get some great PR, that actually leads to commercial interest. At what point did you realize that, oh wow, like there is a repeatable business model here. Like I can go to these corporations, they're trying to show that they are investing in and taking care of the nature risk element. Yeah, when did you see that there was a repeatable way to keep generating sales?
I think it's really come down to the moment when we started exploring the UAE. That's where I find the power of public-private partnerships. That's something that I've always been interested in. But back in Hong Kong, I think those models are typically deployed for infrastructure like public transport or real estate. But being deployed in environment actually makes a lot of sense. It's just difficult to realize. But being right at the right place at the right time with the right players all together, I think the power of pushing nature onto the agenda is sustainability is not just about your carbon footprint. It's really about your impact on nature. And the two are two sides of the same coins. And with the accelerators of and the support from the government, it really comes down to a streamlined process where we have a solution. We need corporate buy-in, and corporates here also work very closely with the governments and with the government endorsement as well. So it's just like the stars aligned and making it really possible with this model of public-private partnerships, a way of deploying nature-based solutions in the region.
Now, do you have, I'm curious if you have any like tips or guidance, and it was either a moment of luck or brilliance that you had, or even just like now reflecting back onto it. Because I think like in concept, we talk about this a lot, also like at Moving World, like, yeah, you're like, oh, public-private partnerships and we do these things. But then when you get into the mechanics of it, all of a
Yeah.
sudden it gets really hard. You're looking at like, okay, well, I'm going to run out of money in 6 months. This corporation is like, well, our legal process takes at least 6 months in order to do it. And the government's like, yeah, if you're lucky, we can get through this in a year or two. Like, so different timelines, different stakeholders, different
Yeah.
needs. How, like, maybe bring me even one into like one of the kind of contracts or partnerships you're most proud about, and how did you align the stakeholders and actually get to a signature and progress on that one?
Oof, that's the pain point. That's painful. Like looking back, it sounds like, oh, that's wonderful. That's where
Yeah,
we
yeah,
start.
yeah.
But when you're at that stage, you're like, oh, when is this getting over? Like, when is this contract getting signed? It takes time. No lies,
Yeah.
it takes time because I think there are two key elements that make this kind of like public-private partnership functional. One is trust, and I think the second part is being science-based. At least in our case. I think data tells a lot of story. It's not just about storytelling. It's not about the business opportunity and the projections. It's not necessarily that. It's just the fundamental numbers as to this is why we take this approach. We don't want to create another artificial structures to replace coral reefs. We just want to give them a kickstart. Time is now. Like the urgency is here. Like with this 2030, like 2030 as the restoration, ecosystem restoration, that decade of ecosystem restoration, now is the best time to invest if nature is really part of the country's capital that you really care about. So I think it's using the science to justify it and essentially build into your pitch because it's not what you say, it's what science says. And trust is another part that is really, really critical. It's not just about having the best technology or the best data that you have in hand. How do you make it inclusive and to build trust with the local communities and with different stakeholders is a lot more difficult than it sounds.
I'm curious, what are some of the tips or like tools or mental models or frameworks? Like, what were some of the things that you did to like, kind of get out of your own door, out of your own building, so to say, and go and like build that trust, especially as like some of these are also in like slightly different cultures and political climates, right, than the one that you had originally started in.
Is I have to admit that I'm not a particularly refined founder. Like I don't have like a toolbox that I have that like I don't have any secret. But from my personal experience, I think the key is really find your local champion. Find someone that I think it's difficult, no matter how good you are, it's impossible to build the trust overnight. And you will never be as good and trusted as somebody who have like 20 or like decade of experience. So finding that kind of local champion, the needle mover that really understand that buy into your solution, buy into your mission, and do the work for you. Not necessarily you, it's for the mission, for the shared
Right.
mission. So I think it's the most powerful tool that I've been seeing, again, like maybe not tool, but like traits, is to be genuine. Like don't, there's no hidden agenda. We are all doing this. Like lay everything out. Here's the mission. Here's the toolbox. If you buy into that, if that's something that is persuasive, somebody will come onto you, like be on your side and make it happen because they believe the mission that you're driving, the purpose
Yeah.
that you're driving.
Yeah. I guess second time that I'll reference Minaj here, but in his he talked about trust is not like a dot, but it's a line, right? And so it's like by building up a series of like touch points and repeated interactions, encounters, right? Then you have a line, right? And then people can kind of start to see like, okay, this person is always sticking towards their mission. Did you find that, like because kind of at the same time there was some new either by region or in some cases some countries or some even more like kind of intergovernmental work, there was increasing like legislation forcing companies to do more reporting. There was some pressure on governments to do more. There was some new laws. When you were finding these local champions, was it like at the time, were you saying, okay, here's a new law, or here's a new reporting regulation, let me go find somebody who's pushing that forward? Like, were you very kind of, so to say, like strategic in that regard in doing it? Or how else did you find these champions and actually get in the door? Because sometimes, like, again, it sounds great, but actually getting time with these people can be really, really hard. So yeah, I'm curious how
Yeah.
you got in the door with these folks.
Very good question. I guess sometimes being genuine and strategic sometimes doesn't really go hand in hand. I think for me, what I really appreciate with the partners that we have is that we always have this personal, genuine relationship with them. It's maybe not the most scalable way to present your business, but it really make a change. Like that's something that's like it really lasts long, and the impact is it's not something that is easily projected. Um, in a way, I think what we did back then, and now thinking back, the champions that I found are usually not necessarily the one from a domain expert. Yes, like they are part of the dot, like in the line, like part of the dot in the line that you mentioned. But the one that really connect all of them, the super connectors, are usually the one that are sitting in the peripheral. They could be like coming from an embassy background where they know how to talk to the politicians. They understand the perspective of different stakeholders and understand what are their pain points and what would be their incentives to be part of this solution and be part of this alliance to make things work together. So I think what I find now thinking back is not necessarily a domain expert that really connects everybody together, because I mean, including myself, I sometimes am really too focused on what I really care the most about. But really, the connector is probably somebody that you might overlook if you're just focusing on like being too strategic about. That's at least like some of my personal experience.
Interesting. So this actually resonates a lot, both with what I've spoken about with others, but from my own experience. But I want to reflect this back to see if I'm tracking right. And so you say, okay, that's the person in the company that has the wallet, the budget, right? Or that's the government official that has all the strategic connections. So you laser focus on them, and then if you can't get in, then you just go look for the next person with the budget. What you're saying is that you found other people on the periphery, people who are maybe really interested in the mission, who could help build the coalition, who could help get you in to speak to the right people, or maybe even go and advocate on your behalf. And so you
Yeah.
found mission first. How do we advance this? And then from there, you were able to get pulled into the rooms where the conversation about money happened, or implementation happened. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mission first and implementation just come very naturally.
Yeah. Cool. I think there's a lot of sense to that, especially in the early stage, right? Where, like, the brand isn't super well known yet. Right. It's a way to build trust at the human level. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Good share. Okay. So you get to your first implementations. You're growing, but, like, it's expensive now to scale. And the framework they used was actually quite good earlier. You said, I got revenue to figure out my business model, but then scaling is a different challenge. How did you then go, okay, we have a business model, but now we need to, like, build more manufacturing facilities. These are very expensive. I need a lot more capital. How did you end up then finding that capital to get to the next stage of growth?
It was actually a lot cheaper than we originally expected. When we first established our eco-engineering facility, well, ADQ was the reason why we started looking into the UAE, but it was not part of the deal. Like, we made decision on our own to decide to come here. What really, like, in our first scoping trip, was really helpful is actually for us to be able to pack all the meetings within the state, like within the ecosystem players, be that Hub 71, like a startup incubator, or ADIO, like Abu Dhabi Investment Office, for foreign, like encouraging and attracting foreign investment, KISAT, like a free zone specifically dedicated for making manufacturing possible in the UAE. So all of that combined, like, I remember that was the time that we visited the UAE and Abu Dhabi, and it was also during the COVID time. Going back to Hong Kong takes 21 days of quarantine.
Oh my gosh.
It's hard to imagine. But during that time, we also won the elevator pitch organized by the Hong Kong Science Park, and we got this first big check, like literally big check as an award. It was 100,000 US dollar. 3 months later, I just, you know what, this is back then, that was actually the kickoff equity-free capital that we had. So I was like, okay, here's what we have, and here's what we need in Abu Dhabi to set up our facility. So we just went all in. Like, here's our first production line with that big check that we
Wow.
had.
Wow. And so you just you went for it. You saw the opportunity there. There was market opportunity, commercial benefits, manufacturing benefits. So you decided to relocate there. Uh, and and then are you still in the same facility? Have you had to like further expand the facility?
We have. I don't know if you would share photos, but I would love to share with you like the
Yeah.
evolution of that of our facility.
Oh, perfect.
It was actually very emotional. That was the first lease that I've ever signed in my life. Like 400 square meter of a empty, like a warehouse style empty
Yeah.
space. We walk in, we paint the paint together, like we were vacuuming the floor with a lot of dust. So we essentially built it our hands, like with my other
Wow.
co-founders, our first staff. It has been a long journey,
Yeah.
and very proudly to say that like very recently, like actually we kind of grow out of that capacity. That one production line has already is not enough for our commercial need at the moment.
Wow.
So we are scaling and working with the local partners to essentially really turn it into an industrial grade manufacturing with our own IP and production as well.
Wow, amazing. Yes, absolutely. Would love like photos or if there's a complimentary video, we can add it to the show notes. Maybe we can even splice it in here to those that are watching on video. Really fun to see. And I mean, I can almost like feel the emotions a little bit. Like I'm sure that must be like really incredible to both have like the fear of like signing that lease, right? And then now to be on the other side and seeing it grow is any time that there is a big, capital outlay, i.e. for a lease, for manufacturing equipment, or to expand, I can only imagine that that must be like uh, tense, right? You're like, oh, like this is exciting, but like now, like it has to work at even bigger volume. What like at this point in time, I guess we're kind of catching you, kind of like, okay, you're maxing out of this facility, so you're making another big capital exchange here. What has you optimistic? What has you hopeful? What has you feeling confident enough to take that leap?
Oh wow, that's I hate to admit this, but I was delusionally optimistic. It's so hard. I think being an early stage founder, be that whether you're a social entrepreneur or generally like any sort of entrepreneur, you are betting on a future where it's probably with like 10% of success rate because
Yeah.
nothing is aligned. Like you simply, the nature of running a company and a startup is, at least for me, maybe it's just because I'm unrefined and unseasoned. I really don't have the long term visibility, especially at the early stage. Like there's too many uncertainty. If I were an accountant and look at every possibilities, I was like, the conclusion is your success rate is probably 0.0001%.
Yeah.
Don't do it. But I guess in a way, like most founders also out there believe in your own and your own and your own effort and your team's effort in changing that possibility. It's no longer just if you're looking at this paper and like just on the stat. Yes, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to implementation, it's a lot about people, especially for early stage startup. So if you have the right team, I think that so-called possibility is not just a number. It's really about the people that are driving behind it. So I guess thinking back, I don't want to say delusionally, like I was delusionally optimistic, but I'm also I have 1,000% trust on the team that we will make it happen, despite there is a lot of uncertainty, like as a matter of fact.
Yeah, always. Yeah, I love that. Delusional optimism, I feel is like maybe the name of a book in the future that you could write on the journey. But Rico, I just have to say this is the second time that I think you've said like, oh, like unrefined. But I think there's something to your authenticity and your mission driven and like and the way again, I mean, it's like I remember your pitch from years ago, during an event that's just like full of like pitches, and there's so many things that capture your attention. So I love I love the self-deprecating founder. I think I'm with you on one of them, but I think there's like, even just hearing your story, it's like there feels like there's just such like a pragmatic and like human kind of centered, like I need to go forward. I'm going to build this trust, and I'm doing that at like a very human level. And it's something that I think is really consistent that I've seen across the guests on the show, is that like, yeah, we're working on these big system challenges, but we're moving through that at a human level. And you talked about your team as well as part of this, like having trust in your teammates. So I think that's yeah, it's, you know, anybody can craft a spreadsheet, right? I think working and building trust with humans is a much harder aspect, and it seems like you've spent a lot of time in there. Um,
Yeah, it's an
I
art.
it's an art, and there's tension there, right? I think, it's like, I'm sure, and I don't know, maybe I can put you on the spot here. You know, in building some of these relationships, whether that's been on the team or whether that's been with external stakeholders, I'm sure you've kind of hit some points maybe where there is tension, right? Like, team members want to take the organization in a different direction, or maybe, a potential partner isn't pulling through. One of the challenges that I think we really have as like really purpose driven and mission driven founders is trying to balance like our mission, but also still balancing human relations. I'm wondering for you if there's like a story that kind of comes to mind that you would be willing to share, of like when you kind of got put into a point of tension, and how you were able to move through that.
I guess that's the ugly truth of running a company. And to me, it's a personal growth journey as well. One realization that I've had in the past few years is that there are visitors in your journey. It sounds very cliche, but it really is. Like, there are people that will be with you from point A to point B, and there will be different group of people to come with you and to join your journey from point B to C. Similarly, if you think back, like, it's a little bit philosophical, but it's almost like, look at your parents. Like, I spend certain, like, between my early childhood, I spent a lot of time with them, but now I wish I could, but it just naturally, that it just doesn't work that way anymore. So I guess firing, if I can be very honest, firing and saying goodbye to team members who really has been with the journey with you, especially since the early stage, it has been and still is one of the most difficult lesson or moments that I realize. It's not always a happy ending necessarily, but what I realize is that there are reasons why they were with you in the first place. If like, of course, there are emotions that would be on the way that make the conversation very high stake, very emotional. But at the end of the day, I am also still very proud to say that I'm still in touch with majority of them, because it just, once the emotion is gone, the reason why they were with the company in the first place is because of the mission. Like, once you get out of that emotion, I think a lot of people actually see that this was probably the best outcomes for the mission, not necessarily for the company. I think there are times that it's difficult. But yeah, I think that's also one of the reasons why I still, even until today, I still really believe the idea that people joining our team is really for the mission, because that's really go beyond the individual level. That makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, when I was starting the journey, I was talking to like another entrepreneur, and he was telling me this story where he had to let go a lady on his team that was like high performing, but there were some cultural challenges and cultural differences, and ultimately, as the organization was getting to the next stage, it's like the book "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." He started to just see it, and tried to coach and tried to develop through that, but self-admittedly, he had shared like he wasn't the best manager, so he was
Mm.
failing in some of those efforts, so he ended up firing her. And it was like 5 years later, he's like, gets on a plane and sits down, and lo and behold, he's sitting right next to the lady that he had fired. And she was like, "David, how are you?" And she's like, "That was the best thing that you ever did for me." And I remember him telling me this story of I think we, like, as founders, we get like really caught up of like, you're here for this mission, I care about you, like I can make everything work, I'm delusionally optimistic, to use your words, like we can make this work, right? And we think about like, oh, how hard it would be, how bad it would feel like if somebody fired me. And I think
Yeah.
having that like long-term lens to kind of look at a situation and say, hey, what's really best for the company, what's really best for the teammates, and what's really best for this person, right? If they're in a role and they're
Yeah.
not succeeding, like
Yeah.
this is just going to go. But it's still hard. Is there are there any like tips? Like, is there anything that you do or you have used, like when you do really have to have those difficult conversations with team members? Is there anything that you found that either like gives you strength or helps you prepare or helps you move through those conversations?
It's still hard. I think what I started to embrace is that high stake conversations are not necessarily bad. I think it is a growth opportunity. And if there's anything that I think really make a difference, it's really from the recruitment. Like if like I'm repeating myself, but
Yeah.
if people are joining the company with the grand mission that is beyond their individual achievements, then I think it really put everybody on the same page to start. If, of course, things would change, like especially when you're like deep in the operations, when you're got caught up in the day to day, and there's a lot of conflicts and conversations going on around you. But that's always a good safety net that we can always bound back to. What I really appreciate is probably honesty and transparency. If somebody's not doing great, then you don't sugarcoat it, but also don't make personal comments. Just focus on the fact if it is working, it's working. If it's not working, I think that person would need to know as well. Take it or not, like it's their own choice, but I think at least on the organization level or at least on the personal level, I would love to continue to be honest and genuine on things that they do, seeing this as a growth opportunity for everybody.
Yeah. I think that emphasis on growth is fantastic. Is there anything that you do from like a cultural perspective or just like consistently, at the organization to help really implant this idea of like growth, right? And the reason that I ask is I think sometimes you'll see a corporation be like, growth mindset, but then everything that is practiced, it's like they don't let people take risks. They don't have a psychologically safe place for people to give and receive feedback. So I'm curious, like, what do you do around the organization to help it really feel like, hey, we're all on a growth journey here?
Mm. That part is hard. I think on the systematic level, we are still at a growth stage. We are now a team of just about 20 to 30 people, like 20 full-timer plus part-time and freelance on the side. That's something definitely I would love to implement better, like to introduce this systematic feedback. Like how should we structure feedback? Like what are the comments that you should be focusing on? How do we structure regulars OKRs? And what would be the management structure, peer-to-peer manager? That's something that I've sorry to say this, I've only been learning recently
Yeah.
from the book called Scaling People. Love that.
Okay.
Very useful.
Yes.
Highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like on the people front, I think there are like just on the cultural side or something that like we operate in principle. I think we are a team of just mentioned 20 full-timer and we have 17 nationalities. I think in this
Wow.
setting like that, it's extremely difficult to lay out like an HR like handbook that what you should do. There's no way that you can operate that way. So the general framework is we don't assume there's like common sense. There's no common sense like because people coming from different backgrounds, different experience would have a
Totally.
different definition of common sense. So don't assume like everything just laid out very clearly, follow the simple structure of what, when, how. Like don't assume. Just and
Yeah.
even so don't assume so that you don't get disappointed and you don't get frustrated. So I think that's like the general framework that we operate is more about yeah, like just general principles, but nothing in system yet.
Yeah. So that's so interesting to me. I'd love to riff on this for you at the moment. So like one of the well, without going too much into our own because I don't want to like add too much of like a tangent here, but sometimes what I've experienced and seen with others is when we try and kind of create this like trusting culture and we use things like don't assume. There's almost like by saying don't or do not, there's like a slight like negative like connotation to that, right? Even though the purpose of saying that is positive, right? It's like Phil Knight
Yeah.
from Nike used to say, "We make the worst shoes except for all the others," right? And that for him was like a very motivational way to keep going, but that motivates founders. I think, a lot of people on the other side are saying like, you mean I make bad shoes, right? I'm working my ass off over here. I how do you um like how do you kind of balance a place where you can I don't know, do you see where I'm going here, right? Where you almost have like a little bit of this like hard approach to what it really takes, but still creating like, warmth and comfort and joy for employees.
Oh, that's also another intricate art that I think it will take me years to really get better at this. But I think it really comes down to the way that you explain it as well. At the end of the day, the reason behind like don't assume is also because we want to create this warm environment where you personally don't get frustrated so that your attitude would become better and the other side also get what they need to know. So it's not like at least I personally, especially not as a non-English native speaker, and many others within our team as well, is that we don't necessarily want to bind to like certain way of expression. Of course, like it matters, but it's more on like general things like don't make it personal, don't make an adjective about like what your colleagues did or did not do. Just make it factual, like just
Yeah.
about the fact. And I wouldn't mind saying things like don't do this or do this,
Yeah.
if the background or the rationale behind it is like aligned with our mission and purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the factual piece, sometimes that can be so hard to separate from the emotions in the moment. I know at Moving Worlds, we rely pretty heavily on a 5 why retrospective process. And I'll include it in the show notes, but there's this like retrospective like manifesto. And
Mm,
it talks about like it actually does, I think, use the word like assume, but it's like assume people like we're operating with the best intentions, right? Like nobody
yeah,
came to the table trying to do a bad thing. And it's we put it on this like board then that we like move through a retrospective together to kind
yeah,
of to highlight like and I don't know, it resonates with me in this like idea of like don't assume.
yeah.
So cool. I'll add that into the show notes. Okay, I wanna shift gears here a little bit into business models. So you sell to other businesses,
Enterprise, yeah.
to enterprises. Um, Getting your first one, I think it was inbound. You shared earlier. Talk about getting numbers 2 through 10. Like you don't yet have enough track record, right? So building those like early first sales when trust really matters. What did you do? How did you get in the door at more places? How did you end up closing some of these sales, especially in these
Yeah.
early stages?
Yeah, so I think the way that we operate, even until today, we have just about 20 clients. And as mentioned, we're growth already 19x to a million revenue this year. So I think what we did is that we target specifically the industry that are the industry definer. Like they are the ones who put the best practice in the market, especially now that the regulation is still catching up in some places. So we really find the giants that that have the appetite and the willingness to take the leap of faith to make sure that they stay ahead of the game. So with that, we also have the benefit from growing within them. So it's not necessarily growing project by project. What we really see, and that highlights again why relationship building is so important. We essentially grow with our client. Our clients easily, all of them are above 5 billion asset under management. So with that, that means that they also have a portfolio of projects within their company. So that means if we can prove a point about how we can bring value, how we can make sure that your operations is more nature positive, how does it make it easier to get through the regulations, especially in areas where they have to regulate the impact of nature and biodiversity. If we can prove that point, then the downstream and upselling is actually a lot easier because then it's not just about one project test at test scale or at pilot. It's really about how, okay, now we want Archireef to grow with us outside of our, for example, without like our UAE, but also with our pod operators elsewhere in Rotterdam, in Africa. So with this, we have the benefit of growing within and together with our client.
So banks, port operators, developers, either for like having a license to operate, like community goodwill, government goodwill, or regulation, like they're required by law to do things, or in some places they just need to disclose their impact on nature. um, they essentially see you as a viable solution to help hit some of those either regulatory or reporting requirements so that they look good to investors or that they can maintain a license to operate. And once they see a successful implementation, they say, okay, let's then continue. Let's do this in the next project. Let's expand our current
Yeah.
implementation. I'm understanding that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you do, because the I would imagine that uh, the proof cycle is long, right? It's like right now, somebody like turns on their computer, tries a new AI tool. They're like, oh, wow, this is incredible. I see value instantaneously. Yours are like, once you get through contracting, then you have to go through the effort of manufacturing these and then putting these on the seafloor and then watching things grow. And then I'm imagining probably have to report back to say it's actually doing
Yes.
what's happening. It's a long cycle. And sometimes you're probably getting into like renewals or trying to push for growth before you're even through the first cycle. I'm curious if that resonates. And then if so, how do you still get for growth, even if your first cycle or implementation hasn't yet fully demonstrated its promise?
It's low. Like I think that's also the nature of working with nature. Like nature takes time to show. It's not like a software we can just plug in as a magic and it just automatically show you the
Yeah.
impact. It naturally takes time. And the way that we work with our client is that we don't want it to be a marketing stunt. We don't just deploy the reef tiles or to restore certain area and say that, hey, like you have like our client have done this and that. All of our clients actually work with us for a minimum of 3 years for data subscription. And throughout these 3 years, we also tell them, hey, here's your first year, here's the result, and here's how you should be like utilizing these data. We also give them like a consultant because the reality is that nature is such a nascent market that not that many people understand what's the value of that. How do you make use of the data that we've collected? So we kind of have that like post sales or post deployment monitoring as a recurring revenue. So
Yeah.
like it doesn't really just make business sense, but it's also for us to introduce nature as a new asset class, and also like education is needed in this space, but it's very natural that it's such a nascent game, but it also makes us very unique in the sense that we're not just a hardware production company. We actually deploy, monitor, and make use of the data that you use, and that I think has been probably one of the most critical point as to how do you convert nature into a commercially viable asset class has been a
Oh,
huge win for us as well.
interesting. Wow. Gosh, there's a whole other podcast episode with somebody that knows that topic to explore that with you. But the piece that I want to click on, which I think is so interesting, and I've seen this, one of the kind of parallel journeys that I've had as social entrepreneurs is with an organization called Seabin out of Australia. And saying it's like a floating trash can that collects like plastic and other waste out of like marinas and others. And they also moved to like a data and a subscription sales as part of that process. But I'm curious for you, you manufacture like a physical thing. That's the mission. That's what creates like the lasting impact in coral. How did you discover and this revenue opportunity? How did you figure out that what we can also sell is this ongoing subscription? And then how did you get your first customer to buy into that?
So we naturally do like so right now we actually the product cycle comes from consultancy where we do the site assessment, we do the habitat modeling, and then we deploy the hardware, monitoring and reporting. So we have this four stage of the product cycle. But before that, we realized that this is how we should like break it into a business model. We have always been doing that because that's general. It's based on the scientific principle. The reef tiles are not magic. Like they're not gonna deploy and just naturally attract the recruits of corals or any other marine species. It's just that we want to make sure that these work, so we have to do this preliminary surveys. And we also want to make sure that it really does work. So we naturally do the data monitoring part. So our business model really is built around that logic of be responsible for if you are doing intervention in the nature. So it is like that's that. And when it comes to the finding the client and scaling that you mentioned earlier, I think it really is the implementation of the framework like TNFD, which is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and the other frameworks that really help us to push these business model out there is IFC, Performance Standard 6 on net gain strategies. So there's so much we can do on our side. We have the best proposition, but it would only work if the client have the pain point, have the real pain point, and regulation is the easiest way, and has been a really powerful tool for us to ride on.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I think seeing where like regulation is going, and like at least in the impact space, we've seen a lot of organizations really get like blindsided in the last year because there was like all this regulation, and then it hits. I'm curious, has that impacted you at all, or are the regulations that have been fueling your business, have those stayed consistent during this time?
I think that definitely is putting a lot of pressure and resistance for the operators. Like some of
Yeah.
our clients or even potential clients will come to us and say, "Hey, we need to come up with a PS6 net gain strategies. We have no idea what that is. We don't even know how to define biodiversity. Let alone how do we measure the impact of biodiversity on that particular project." So there is definitely a movement and a lot of pressure point that we've been seeing from on our client. But good for us is that we understand these regulations early enough. Like we were actually one of the early adopters for TNFD, so we know clearly because TNFD, on the side note, is a set of regulations that are industry and biome specific, which means it's extremely difficult to implement it because there's so many regulations in different layers and different lens to look into it. So we have been very focused on the 3 verticals that we have been working on. So we really understand on their specific industry and the biome that they work on, what are the impact that they will have to face. So with that, like we're kind of good that our client are under the pressure, but we are also offering the solution to make it easier for them to mitigate the risk that they're facing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you're reminding me of like the framework called like job to be done, right? Where it's like you're not going and just like selling an Archireef panel, right? What you're really saying is, hey, you in this, corporate environment have this problem of trying to comply with this regulation, and you probably don't understand it, but you need to. I can help you understand it, and I can help bring to light a solution that will help you have the numbers and the impact that you need to have in order to maintain your business to operate or to be able to attract new investment, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, I think, okay, so you saw that writing sort of say on the wall coming, and then you were making sure that you were aligning your operations with your business model in order to then have like recurring revenue. So not just implementation revenue, but the recurring aspect
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, for being an unrefined founder here. And so on video, there's a lot of air quotes on my side of the screen right now. Rigo, there's so much like pragmatism and thoughtfulness into how you've been building this. There's one other topic I want to go into before we get into our like kind of rapid fire lightning impact round, but which is, you mentioned OKRs very briefly earlier, but you
Yeah.
mentioned it, and I'd love to talk about this because people are like, there's like a curve of like OKR adoption. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful goal setting. And then you try it, and then like everybody hates it, and then like you eventually get to like a better place. I'm curious, so you did implement OKRs within
We did.
Archireef, yeah. And does the team love it now, or do you hate it? Like where are you in the adoption curve?
I think the ugly truth is that because this is such a nascent market, like if you asked me the same question 6 months ago, 6 months ago, I should have already given you the same answer. But 8 months ago, I would give you a different set of answers because I think one real reality, and that applies to all industries as well, is that if you're the early adopters, you have to go with the market. So I think a lot of those modifications and adjustment actually come from the fact that, like, based on the market feedback, based on the client feedback, but also on the regulatory side as well. So with that, with that macro environment, like your OKRs, it naturally changes all the time. And even at times that people hate it, I think what I find is actually a very valuable lesson learned. Like for example, for our sales, at the beginning we were like, okay, we need to like follow the standard startup growth magic number. Like you have to have a pipeline of 500 million. Okay, yeah, I can give you that number, but it's so unrealistic. Like within these verticals and within reach, like this is not going to work. So okay, then what about we reduce the pipeline numbers, but make sure that we really spend the time to increase the conversion. I think that's always a learning process. Even at times that they hate it, at least that we know that okay, so in the future that's problem, or at least for now, that's not the way that we should be pursuing. And that go back to the point that you mentioned earlier is that generally we're a very open, transparent culture that if things don't work, just talk to us. Like we always welcome feedback, and we actually need this kind of feedback because you, at the end of the day, like all of you, be that no matter which department that you're from, production, sales, operations, you are the one who knows the industry the best. Like founders are like, oh, scatter-minded. Like we thought we know everything, but we actually know nothing. So we need that feedback from the ground to feed onto our strategy, this strategic decision as well. So I think on that part, it's absolutely fine that we fail on the OKR. We never really stick to it. But at the very least, let's agree throughout time. Let's agree on the set that we think is reasonable. Getting the mutual agreement and buying to say that, okay, after like 6 months, this is the one that we really think that is realistic. Let's go after it.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a good reflection. I think it's something that like I've experienced too, is it's like getting something out there and then revisiting it and like as a founder, somebody who probably pushed for a goal to be able to say, hey, that was the wrong OKR to maybe push for it, but we learn from it. Let's adopt it now based on your feedback, our feedback.
Yeah.
Let's go into this next cycle. Let's give that a real go. It's going to have
Yeah.
some other downstream consequences. Let's revisit those. Like, let's pull those in. Yeah, it's cool to kind of hear your journey through there. I I feel like I could keep going here, but I do want to make sure that we have time for our lightning round. So this is where I get to ask you a couple like really quick questions. So we have shorter answers here. So let's jump into it. What is one mistake that you've made that you really hope future entrepreneurs won't make?
Find the right investor and founder. Is that it, or do you want me to elaborate on that?
We could. I'm sure we could. Whole other episode just on that topic. Okay, tell me about your biggest challenge in fundraising, and what is the one thing you wish all impact investors would know?
The challenge is finding visibility in a ever-changing new market. On the impact investor, I wish you can talk more about both for those impact investors or philanthropic investors, talk more about financials return. For those that are impact investors that are also focusing on the financial return, have a little bit more patience. This is if you bet on a market that will grow, give it the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like notion of like patient capital is easy to talk about, but hard to stay to. And so, yeah, I think it's such a great point. What is one leadership or management skill that you wish you could like turn on that you think would make you a more effective team leader?
Don't talk about logic all the time. Be empathetic.
That must be hard given your background as a scientist. Yeah.
Yes.
What is a quote, ritual, or activity that you turn to for strengths when things get super hard?
Can you repeat the question again? Let me think about this.
Yeah. So what is a quote, a ritual, or activity that you turn to for strength when things are super hard?
I don't know. I don't have an answer. Maybe keep trying. At times that it's probably make you a very stubborn founder, which is not good at all. But keep trying.
Yeah. Wait, tell me a little bit more about why being a stubborn founder, like why do you say it's not good?
delusionally optimistic is a problem. There are times that you have to admit that there are things that just don't work, even if it's logical. So at times you just have to accept that, like, no matter how hard you try, this is a fact that you are not going to change. So balancing it out, that you have to try really hard, but also accepting that, oh, there are not everything works to your flavor.
Yeah. I'm curious, like bring me in your brain here when you're like a delusional founder and you start to realize that something's like not working, but you're like still, no, I'm still gonna try and you go through it. What like do you end up seeking like mentorship? Do you go out and go for a dive in the water? Do you write? Like how do you end up, so to say, like bringing yourself around to maybe one of the pathways that you thought should work and could work isn't?
I think I've started reading a lot more on people management. Not necessarily like managing people for the sake of managing people. It's also about understanding people. One point that you mentioned earlier is that don't say don't, but say do what you can do. The reality that I realize is that not everybody have the ability to understand, to really stand in others' shoes. I think having that perspective is really a gift for those of you who really understand and have the empathy of seeing people from the other side. Is truly a gift that not everybody has. So at times like this, that's definitely something that I'm still learning and trying to be better at.
Yeah. I'm breaking script here a little bit, but just because you referenced you're reading more about management, is there like a book or a framework that you found? You mentioned scaling people earlier. I think that's Claire Hughes Johnson. We'll absolutely put that in the speaker notes. Anything else that you've found that you've really enjoyed or you found has like shifted your perception here in a constructive way?
Um, I think scaling people covers a lot, including the toolbox, like different frameworks to almost like define a people without putting stereotype on, like MBTI or like putting people in different colors. It's not necessarily about labeling people, but for me, like coming from a background which is like monotone, like all scientists, and we all like probably are all very blue people,
Yeah.
understanding perspective is extremely important. Have a little bit of empathy and sometimes imagination as to why this person is doing certain things. They have their own reasoning. Like again, like common sense is not a thing. Logic doesn't really mean anything here because it's at the end of the day coming from the
Yeah.
individual. So I think understanding people is definitely something that I'm still trying to work on.
Yeah. And is there anything, because this is one of these things too, where you're like it's easy to, well, it's not easy, but it's like you can talk about a podcast. You're like, oh yeah, I need to understand people better and like have more empathy as an example. And then you're like in a high stakes business conversation and somebody is saying something and it's just like your entire being, like your entire decades of just like being a scientist and like being structured and being like pragmatic are like forcing up against this like very new concept that you should like have more empathy or something like that. Is there anything that you do to like really help manage, or I mean, because you're really asking, like you're rewiring your brain in order to show up in those conversations. Is there anything that like you do or have done in order to support that?
Yeah. So this is not a professional tool at all, but at times I'm just at high stake conversation. I have two cats, and at times I just want to be like, okay, what would be my daughters, like my furry daughters, like Gaga and Asap would be thinking if they are in the middle of this conversation? Like almost like force myself to be the third person.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I
and
love
I can't.
that.
Yeah. I don't like again like it's obviously not a professional advice or like a
Yeah.
specific toolbox, but it does help pulling yourself out of that emotion at the very least. It does pull me out of that like the ego or the frustration of, but here's like one plus one equals two.
Yeah.
There's no other way. It does pull you out. It's like, okay, look at those cat face. They're just confused.
Yeah.
They just don't understand because in their head, in their mind, one plus one is not two. So
Yeah.
so I guess that kind of that
I
role playing like
Yeah, I love that. I'm just reading a book right now called The Extended Mind, and it talks about all these different things about how like the environment that you're in, or like the things that you're holding on to, or different things that you're like pulling into a conversation can actually help your own brain like function better. So it's not all just like, what can you like rationalize your way into, but just like using some of these things like imagination or others to, or like perspective changes in order to move through conversation. I love it. Now I'm going to steal that. I have a 2-year-old at home, so I'll be like, imagine Ari was like, how would he feel if dad was reacting this way? Yeah. Cool. Okay. Love it. Uh, who is another entrepreneur that you admire?
It's so hard. I really, um, this sounds bad, but because I didn't want to be a founder by design, I don't read enough about the other founders. I'm just doing things like almost intuitively just to get things done, make things work. Like I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But you know what? Maybe herein lies like some hope, because I think at least where I come from, so like West Coast of the United States, we're right above Silicon Valley. There's like so much obsession with like entrepreneurs and founders, and the whole focus is just like, how do you make $1 billion, right? And I think, what I think is important is that like you're looking at this less of like, oh, I don't want to be that founder. It's like, I want to rebuild healthy oceans, right? And I think that there's a mission focus there that actually I'm really touched by.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't have an answer to like a specific founder because the people that I appreciate the most is probably not, at least they don't call or label themselves as founder. But there are a lot of people around me playing in different roles, in different positions that I do admire of certain traits, but I don't necessarily have like a person that I would always, that would be like,
yeah.
oh, I want to be like him or her.
Yeah, point two. No, I love that. I think that's so great. You kind of get to cherry pick some of these from other folks. Okay. Um, Last question, which almost pains me to say it because I'm so enjoying this conversation. It could easily go, but where can we follow you? How can we get in touch? And if anybody's so inspired, motivated, how can we help Archireef on its mission?
Please follow us on LinkedIn, Archireef, Archireef. That's us. My LinkedIn is also by my name. Just ping me.
Amazing. We'll put it in the show notes. Vriko, this was such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. I know it's late there, and I really appreciate you sharing. And more importantly, I so appreciate the fact that you are helping rehabilitate reefs around the world. It's really incredible, the work that you're doing, and I really look forward to following along on your journey.
No, thank you so much, Mark. And I'm so glad that you're doing this. I think one thing that Jane Goodall recently mentioned in her last Netflix show is that no matter how little, how many, like how small the little things that you're doing, multiply by millions time, billions time, it matters. So I'm so glad that you're doing this. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure, Rico. Have a wonderful evening.